Hey everybody, I'm really excited about today's episode. I talked with Jordan Hopkins, and we had a really great conversation about building customer education experiences and supporting more informed customers. Jordan shares his journey from traditional education to customer education at Intellum, and what he's learning all along the way. We talk about how learning experiences don't need to be flashy, and Jordan's insights around interactivity and simplicity. We also talk about what quiet learning and engagement might look like. Alrighty, without any further ado, enjoy my conversation with Jordan Hopkins. All right, welcome to the Building Thinkers podcast. Today, I'm so delighted to be joined by Jordan Hopkins. We are going to get into, I think, all things customer education, product training, as always with a learning lens, and program management and software services, all those fun things. So Jordan, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tracy. I'm excited. I come from an education background too, and building thinkers has been a big part of my life and career. So really excited to be part of your podcast.
Awesome. Okay, we are going to dive right in. We like to talk about what are the things that you build, and this allows our guests to kind of tell their story, what brought you to the work that you're doing today. However you want to get there, give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, so what's funny is I remember in high school, one of my language arts teachers was like, Jordan, you make a great teacher one day. And I remember like scoffing and thinking, no, that's ridiculous. No, I don't want to do more school. Like after I got out of school, who wants to do more of that? Lo and behold, Miss Taylor was totally right. My junior year in college, I decided I want to make an impact on young people. And so I decided to get into teaching with an English degree. And so from there, I taught language arts, journalism, and college prep for 14 years. And I ended up leaving during the pandemic due to some family health reasons. And also I felt a little stagnant in my position there as a teacher. So that love of learning and like inspiring people and kids and building thinkers, it kind of led into my next stage of career. And from there, I went into digital content marketing. I love the writing, I love the creating of digital content and helping people. But I feel like I wasn't the best marketer per se. It wasn't like in my DNA, and I missed learning and teaching. So I decided to kind of lean 100% back into learning and teaching, but in the corporate side of things. And so that's where my career at Intellum began, where I started doing implementations and training clients, and now I'm running the education program for the Intellum platform at their company. So my whole career, definitely education has been a thread, the whole thing. And I'm wearing a Teachers Are Magic shirt today to inspire any teachers who might be listening, because I know my son's in middle school, how hard that job is. And so just wanted to encourage any, teachers on the podcast today too.
Yes. Oh, that's awesome, Jordan. Yes. Shout out to all the teachers, because I think when this episode lands, we'll be a couple weeks into most of the school systems. And it's about then that we need a moment for our teachers to remember the amazing work that they're doing and the impact that they're making in our kids' lives. I have a kindergartner and a fourth grader, so thank you to all of their teachers. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, so tell us a little bit more. Let's get into Intellum and tell us a little bit more about that company and maybe a little bit more about what you're doing there, and we can build off of that.
Yeah, so Intellum, they've been around for this. We're actually celebrating this week our 23rd anniversary as a company. So when you think of SaaS companies or tech companies, you think, oh, maybe they've been around for a couple of years. But they originally started off, I think, in the compliance area of training. And they've now grew into like a full learning management system that can handle social learning, community-based stuff, delivering learning content all from one site. So it's kind of like a Swiss Army knife or one-stop shop for learning platforms. We have a lot of companies from small enterprise-sized companies like Home Depot and Meta who use Intellum to deliver their learning content. A lot of smaller sized companies as well. And so it's kind of cool that we get to see a variety of different nonprofits and large companies using the platform to deliver learning. And yeah, so that's Intellum. And we have close to 200 employees. It's HQ'd in Atlanta, but we have employees over the entire world. It's definitely a remote first company for sure. Yeah. Like we have a lot of people who aren't even in Atlanta. So yeah.
And where are you located?
Tampa, Florida. It's very hot. Like this long sleeve shirt's killing me, but I'm wearing it because I wanted to, have some swag for the teachers today. But yeah, we just had Hurricane Idalia go by. So yeah, Tampa, Florida.
what I'd love to get to is, one of the premises of Building Thinkers is this idea of, in our different careers, in our different industries, there's different things that we learn, and they come to be these if only people knew statements. And that's been really powerful. We've had on financial advisors, we've had on realtors, just people from different spaces. And I think it's particularly interesting when people are formally in the learning and development space, as a lot of our guests tend to be, because you already know how you think about learning and you understand the science of it and the principles of it. But when you think about the work that you've been doing for the last couple of years or over the course of your career, what are some of those things if only people knew? And we haven't had anybody yet in customer education. So if you want to take that lens, if it comes to you, I think that would be interesting because there's a lot of people in that space. So take it away.
Yeah, so there's a couple things I wish people knew. One is that there's a lot of cool overlap between learning best practices between adults and younger people. I know we have andragogy, and there's definitely adult learning principles, which are so valid, but a lot of those things that are good for adults are also good for kids, like autonomy and like exploration and things like that. So one thing if I want to encourage people who are getting into customer education, that your knowledge and foundations for how to design learning experiences will have a lot of application into adults, but there are some unique differences. Like adults are going to come with a lot more experience or prior knowledge. I serve customers who may be LMS experts from a prior role, and so I don't need to explain that to them, right? So they're going to have a lot more prior knowledge coming in, and I think that's one of the biggest things about it. Something else I wish that everyone knew, especially with customer ed, because I do a lot of like instructional videos with Camtasia, and I make a lot of webinars, and I keep realizing that simplicity and accessibility are like top of the pyramid priority, right? Because if you have like a ton of flashing graphics and things that aren't synced up, it might look pretty or be really beautiful, but it can cause cognitive overload for people. And so there's these things called Mayer's principles of multimedia, and he goes over how keeping like your narration synced with what you're showing is better than having like graphics, text, and narration and like overloading your dual channels of your brain. So a lot of times simplicity is king or queen, right? It's like that. A lot of people getting into instructional design think you got to have really flashy stuff to be a good instructional designer. It's not always the case. Sometimes not so sexy job aids all you need to help people perform well. Yeah. They may not need a whole 60-minute course on like how to fill out a memo for the job, right? So, instructional design is often simplicity, very empathetic, very people-oriented, like what they need versus what I think is the best content for their needs. So those are a couple things.
Building on that idea of the overlap, I've seen that to be so true, coming from early childhood into K-12 and into education philanthropy and ed tech. I've been kind of all around the angles of learning, and I've similarly seen that. And in fact, my master's background is in early childhood, focused on students with special needs and neurodiversity, and so that brought me into some of my understanding of why we should personalize learning, why we should allow students to work at their own pace and things like that. And I could not agree more that yes, there's different terms and there's different considerations for adults, but the same underlying principles, it's the same type of brain, it's older, it has more experiences, it has different connections, but those same things that allow a human to learn were there and they're still there. And so I think a lot about that with the learning experience design work that I do as well. And I also could not agree more on the simplicity. I think that sometimes I find myself with like 2 pages of content that I need to get into a one-liner. And I love that type of work because it might end up just looking like one phrase on a slide or as a part of an activity. But if that phrase can give the user handles to carry that in their brain with them out of the session and into the real world, then I've actually done something, that was worthwhile. And I think that some of this comes over time. Perhaps, I'd love your thoughts on this, like perhaps as you become a more confident instructional designer, learning experience designer, whatever you call yourself, you're making content that other people are using to learn. Do you think that some of it comes with this confidence and letting go of some ego to get to what is most simple and not have to like talk the whole time?
Yeah, and because I do have to design a lot of webinars too, that's a tough one, right? Because when you're designing like live virtual training, not everyone who attends wants to always contribute and talk a lot. So I found like letting go of ego and increasing crowdsourcing knowledge, increasing the people aspect, that takes really intentional social learning and cohort-based learning, and it's often a little messier because you're letting other people give feedback and not just you. Other people might demonstrate or show things off on their screens or like share ideas in the chat, and you do have to like kind of let go of that ego. And I feel like building that kind of trust and cohort-based learning with like adults, especially over digital spaces, takes time and intentionality. Because think about the school, right? Like my son right now, he's stuck in several classrooms all day. Same kids, same teacher. They have to kind of learn to get along, right? Whereas like my customer ed folks, I might see, say you're one of the clients who uses Intellum, I might see you once every month or two in a training. And it's not like we're highly connecting. So unless we build spaces to have learning communities together and like learn with people over time, it's really hard to like build that level of like connection you're talking about, I think.
Yeah, and that strikes me as maybe one of the distinctions. I was thinking about this in preparation for this episode. What are some of the distinctions between customer education? We talked about how there's a lot of similarities between, student learning and adult learning, or K-12 learning and adult learning, but what about between customer education? Because it has a different purpose in some ways. How has that been different for you?
So I feel like, well, because I did do internal enablement also at Intellum, and I feel like when you do L&D, like specifically for a company, you do have a little more opportunity to talk to your learners or clients, right? Oh, I feel like a lot more. I know a good customer education professional is listening all the time, but in different ways. So for me, I have to use a lot of surveys, product usage data, feedback and ratings on stuff, what they're searching for. So I have to put my ear to the railroad track, so to speak, and listen for vibrations. And for me, coming from a K-12 background, I'm like, oh, I wish I could like just reach to the screen and talk to that person a little more face to face, but I can't always do that. So I think one thing with customer ed is you have to have a lot of like proactive data finding, Sherlock Holmes kind of skill with hearing from your customers, because you can listen during sessions from pre and post feedback, right? But there's a lot of listening you can do outside of sessions too with your clients, with the content, and it's a lot of nets you got to throw to hear from them, because that is a challenge. I feel like because internally you're in a lot more meetings together and each other's names a lot more, whereas the customers I may not see ever again in the trainings, right? For example, so capturing feedback is really important.
Right. Okay. I want to dive even further into a piece of that because I'm wondering, so I want to dive into the root of the need for the education. And so I think you're hitting on this when you're talking about listening to them on webinars, the questions that they're asking, looking at data. So I see all that like on the front end, trying to figure out what is the actual problem that they're having, or the misunderstanding or the lack of knowledge that they have that maybe isn't allowing them to use the tool in the way that you want, or isn't allowing for the engagement. I know there's a ton of different things that could be over there, but what is the process? Is it a formalized process, or maybe a more of like an octopus with many different like arms and legs? Are they all arms for an octopus? Anyway, where you would think, I digress. Yeah. So yeah, I'm wondering about that. What does the process look like in customer education to get at the root of what the learning objectives even are for your content?
Yeah, that's a great one. So like, I guess tentacle one, right? Or maybe the main tentacle and heart. Okay. Yeah, we'll stick with octopi analogy. So the heart, I think octopus have 3 hearts, right?
I don't know. Ooh, I don't even know what really the legs are called.
I think they have 3 hearts, or they have 3 chambers. But so like the heart of customer ed is like what the business needs are. So let's say we're having lots of customers churn from a product, or we want to increase annual recurring revenue. There's like certain goals of the business, right? There's that need. Then there's the adults' needs with the product, right? And for that'd be like the second chamber of the heart, okay, of the octopus. And then those often are about the 5 moments of learning need. I don't have them all memorized, but there's one like when something's new to you, or when you have to apply something, or when you have to you have a question or a problem to solve, right? There's different needs for learning. And during like a client's journey with us, like what a prospect's needs look like versus someone who's established is very different for learning, right? Mm-hmm. So for example, let's say we spot a gap with maybe clients who are onboarding with the product need a lot more support, right? Maybe they don't have the LMS experience, and so we got to design learning solutions that support that. So we have business need, we have the learner's needs, and then we have, I guess down here might be what content or things we have available to address that, and all that overlap in the middle of the octopus's heart is like the sweet spot where we can kind of go out from with our tentacles. Maybe the tentacles would be like modalities to reach people, like quick job aids, or structural video would be second tentacle, and like third tentacle would be like a webinar series or a cohort. And it's not always one size fits all solution, and some people are going to come to one thing and not come to another. Some like all self-paced stuff and never come to a webinar. So it is challenging. You do have to really listen to the audience to find out what they need while still addressing business needs. And you don't want to go rogue and just do things that have no business impact whatsoever, so.
Yeah, it's so interesting. First of all, I like our octopi metaphor. I think that works nicely. And also, I'm just thinking about, yes, these different areas, these different modalities and needs, and how often I hear clients that shall not be named come and say, hey, I want a 6-hour training on this thing. And I'm like, okay, can we talk a little bit more about why you think you need a 6-hour training on said thing first? And
that's
they're
a
like,
great question, by the way, to ask.
I just want the 6-hour training. No, look, can we just go back over here? You can buy a 6-hour training on psychological safety over here if that's what you want, but I would like to design it for the actual need. Can we go underneath and do root cause analysis, needs assessment? If you've already done that, great. May I please see the evidence that this is a need? What is it that the humans are doing that you would like them to be doing something different if you don't feel like there's psychological safety or whatever the area is? And so it sounds like you have that, but you also have to think about these two different groups of people at the same time of what are the needs for the customer, what are the needs for the business. And of course, those are like mutually beneficial needs sometimes. And sometimes you might have to try harder to find the connection to see how can we solve for the customer need that will also impact the business and make those connection points. So that sounds like lots of fun. You said Sherlock Holmes before. It's fun investigation.
It is, yeah. And you asked about process for finding all that stuff. Some practical things are classic needs analysis, voice of customer research, poring over any NPS score or survey results the business has. There's probably a lot of things to listen to that your company might already have available on hand. If not, then you got to talk to stakeholders to get you in touch with customers and get that data fresh. There's also, a lot of product education also deals with helping other parts of the business. So support team, right? How many tickets do we have on features X, Y, Z? Can we help decrease those in the next month? So finding small goals or things you can help support. If there's a certain feature 80% of the tickets are about, okay, maybe I need to spend a lot of tentacles on that spot for a while, right, to address that need. So I feel like customer ed is very multi-pronged and multidisciplinary because I collaborate with marketing, we collaborate with support team. It's definitely a village mindset. You just cannot do it in a silo.
Yeah, and that was also making me think about, are there ever times where you have an avenue to go into product and say, hey, we see that there are these 80% of tickets are around this, and maybe they already have their own system for this, but are you able to cross-collaborate and say, perhaps this is actually a user experience need to be worked on rather than a training need? Is there any space for things like that?
Yeah, so we do have regular product meetings where we have syncs with go-to-market with the different pods or the different product pods we have. So there's always space in there for us giving feedback. I do also have to realize that it's tough because we often get feedback on the products, right? But at the same time, I don't own the product development. So I have to be very thoughtful and courteous in how I share that. And so I think with any of this kind of stuff, it takes good working relationships where there's give and take, and they're offering me feedback on enablement and training and vice versa. And I think any good customer education team and product teams and support teams, right, and marketing, they should all be looking at similar customer data on the product to inform future decisions as a business, right? So hopefully what I share shouldn't be a surprise at that point. It might just be an echo of it. So that's ideal state, right, where we're all kind of on board with similar data, and willing to look at the product together. But at the same time, I know my lane, and so I'll do my best to serve in different ways.
I want to go back to something that you said in the If Only People Knew. You were talking about this idea of how we tend to overcomplicate with flashy and interaction and things like that. What are some of the either principles or just even the mindsets that you bring to your instructional design work that help you get to the simple, what you're going to share with the customers in education?
Yeah, so is it okay to make a book recommendation?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think if you really want to nerd out and grow your expertise in how to train people to do things better, there's a book called Building Expertise by Ruth Colvin Clark. I think it's from 2012. It's a little bit older, but it's like a mini master's degree in how to design things and not overload the brain, and how to be simple and how to train people for different types of skills. And so when it comes to principles, there's definitely less is more. There's a lot of research-backed principles that Ruth Colvin Clark and Richard Mayer have researched and done and shared. There's a bunch like modality principle and others where it's based on the dual encoding parts of our brain with audio and visual, right? And this especially gets into disability as well and accessibility. Say we're narrating with audio, but what we're talking about is not syncing up with what's being shown. It can cause split attention, right? Or even small things like having a graphic on your webpage with like it labeled like 1 through 10, the different parts of an organ, for example. But then there's a paragraph of text, and then it finally gets to labeling what those 10 things are. They have to scroll back and forth, and that slows down comprehension of what it's trying to teach, right? So simple things of like overlaying things onto the graphic as much as possible, right? And then that brings up an issue also of alt text and accessibility. Should you bake all your numbers and text into the image? Probably not. Once you learn your tools, it helps you design with simplicity and straightforwardness in mind to support the learner. I hope that makes sense. It's different.
Yeah.
There's a lot out there. They all kind of go with the mind of not causing extraneous cognitive overload. You want to really help promote good thinking. Earlier, you brought up an interesting point, too, about, I think you were talking about designing for disabilities and how if you can give them like a frame or model to work with when they left with you, right? And that's a big part of designing, too, is like, how can we help them build schema or mental models to house things? There's an author named Julie Dirksen. She has a book called Design for How People Learn, and she compares schema, I believe, to shelves or shelving units, right? So you got to have a shelf for them to place that knowledge on. And if they're coming into your instruction, what's a shelf you got to build for them to hold it? So they have no prior schema, like things like analogies, acronyms, silly octopi metaphors to help house them. Whatever you need to build that, house that schema temporarily to scaffold it, it's a win. And so, yeah, there's no easy short answer to that because it all depends.
Yeah, no, I know it's not a simple question. What do you think about learning, Jordan? It's like, well, there's a lot. But I think what I find interesting in asking questions like that is because there are so many frameworks, because there's so many authors, in the space, what is it that you take with you that you put into practice? Something from those books gave you handles that you've carried into your work that have helped you. And I always find that interesting. One of the other questions that I like to ask now takes it to your own employee and your own experience as a learner. Will you walk us through an example of something that you used to not know how to do, now you know how to do, and unpack for us how you learned it?
I remember when I was a young teacher, I did not go to teaching school. Just mind you, I was hired fresh out of college, no experience. Do you want to hear a quick story of how bad it was?
Yes, I want to hear.
Yeah, so you know how it's like being whatever kind of education you do, whether it's like with kids or adults, structure and clear processes to enable them to do their job in the classroom, it's so important. So I remember I was passing back quizzes to the kids, and I had no process or structure for even passing back papers. It was just like random. And I remember this one girl looking up at me like just mouth agape, and she says out loud, not to be mean, but she's like, "You are that new, aren't you?" Like she just realized I was like a new teacher finally. And so I've realized that a big part of engaging people or transferring learning, there's before, during, and after any learning experience, right? So if you want customers to learn how to use product features beforehand, what are your structures in place to communicate the event, to enable them to have what they need to do it right? Are they logged into said thing, your said product? Do they have what they need? All that stuff is part of learning design and proper engagement, it's not just about being loud or a lot of people think being an engaging educator, you got to be really outgoing and personable. And I've had great learning experiences where I very kind of calm, straightforward people, and it was blown away. So, I think enabling people having processes is a big part of it. And then when it comes to presenting information, over the years, I learned that engagement isn't always loud or overt. Okay, so for example, you could have a moment in your customer training where everyone's marking the screen up, right? It looks really cool because 100% participants are all engaging, but for some it might be super distracting because all the squiggles are hard to follow. It's covering up the original text of what you're trying to present, right? And so not everything is always good engagement, but sometimes a quiet, reflective question where we all sit back and think for a minute or two, that could be better mental engagement than a so-called activity. Engaging learners is more than just overt behavior. It's also what they take away from it reflectively with attitude, behavior change, and how it transfers back on the job or in real life. I remember one time when I was a teacher, we were doing a whole poetry unit. The skill was compare and contrast essay. Yeah. The original thing they handed me from the district was horrible. So my version was comparing poetry to music lyrics. And they can choose whatever songs they want, whatever themes. But then I brought in all the library's poetry books into my classroom pretty much. And the kids, I told you, your job right now is just quietly browse all these poems, read until you find a poem that speaks to you, read it, enjoy it, and write down your thoughts and why you liked it and kind of keep track of that. And so I remember my kids were all in there reading Robert Frost, and then a classroom observation comes in at that moment. And they were observing me, and what they felt, they didn't see any engagement happening. It's just kids reading poetry books quietly. Okay, but here they are, they're reflecting on Robert Frost, teenagers, right? They're engaged with seriously reading and writing. You can see the engagement, but you had to look for it a little differently. A lot of people, when they think of engaging learners, they think it's got to be loud, overt, but that's not always the case. And so I share that story as how that's kind of stuck with me over the years. That made a difference. And that was one part of a larger learning experience, not just a 5-minute activity. That later fed into discussions in groups, which fed into them planning and outlining their essays, comparing 2 different poems, 2 different song lyrics, and then writing these things and sharing. I mean, the kids would love it. Well, at that moment, they thought it wasn't engaging enough.
Perhaps there should be a before, during, and after on our observation forums about what was happening before and during the lesson that you saw and what was planned after. That's so powerful. One of the things that stands out to me is this idea of quiet engagement and what that looks like. And I've seen that to be true as well in sessions. And it was reminding me of times in which I even thought this facial expressions and the body language in a room that I was in that was facilitating meant that they were not tracking with me. And come to find out later, after debriefing and understanding this particular culture, it was within that facial expression was thinking. I was pushing their thinking, and that looked like anger to me, but it wasn't. I was misreading. Yeah. It was thought-provoking and mindset shifting, which is exactly the content we were trying to do, but I was a recovering perfectionist and people pleaser, and I was like, oh my goodness, they're not tracking with me until I read the surveys, and they couldn't be more different from what I had thought. And so now I have learned to give a lot more space to and suspend any judgment on my own performance during the middle of it based on feedback from the audience. And the other thing that stood out from that was this idea of before, during, and after. And probably 15 out of the 30 episodes I've recommended this book, so I'll just keep going, and maybe someday I'll get to meet her. But Priya Parker's The Art of the Gathering, that book has been really instrumental in thinking about how we plan for gatherings. And she talks so much about the moment that somebody knows there will be the gathering, it's already started. And so I think about that so often in just how flippant we are sometimes with, oh, there's going to be a training, here it is on the calendar, and here's the Zoom link. And so of course people come with prior notions. And I was in a session one time where I was training teachers, and they brought their grading to do during the session. That's what they think about what they're going to get here. Clearly, I haven't done a good enough job to know ahead of time that this will be interactive, and it will not be a good time to be grading papers. So I think that so much of that work now that is done on the front end to help people have expectations going in that are some sort of excitement, that there's aligned need, that they will get what they need, that there's value to their time. This is where I think sometimes learning objectives, just to put learning objectives there versus really helping people read things like that, if you call them learning objectives or transformation statements, whatever, so they can look at those. They should really be meaningful. They should be aligned to the needs that they actually have. And then if they realize, hey, I don't actually need that, then wouldn't it be wonderful if people can opt in and out? And I know places are moving towards that direction, but I think that learner agency, we have so far to go in corporate and K-12 and everywhere in between to really allow all of the information and knowledge and stuff we have to really allow learners to access it and make meaning of it. I think agency is going to be a big piece of that going forward.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, a lot of learning science touches on agency and choice and universal design for learning, like multiple pathways to showcase your mastery. And Merrill's first principles of instruction, it should be task-centered and relevant to the needs of what they do in real life or on the job. And then there's John Keller's ARCS-V model for motivation, and it stands for attention, relevance, confidence, satisfaction, and volition. And it all gets into the what's in it for me. Does this matter? Can I do it quickly and with proficiency pretty soon? Is it going to be worth my time? And will I be satisfied with the results in the end? I mean, that's all stuff we all care about. Because if a diet routine or exercise routine is impossible for me to do from the start, I'm going to drop it real fast. There's no way I'm going to make a habit of that. It should be challenging, but not frustratingly challenging for them. But yeah, you brought up a good point about agency and choice. It's super supported by research and what we like as humans.
Yeah.
Can you imagine you turn on Netflix and it gives you one option for your movie? Like, that'd be so horrible.
I don't know. If it was accurate, I would like that. Sometimes I'm overwhelmed by the choices there. I'll take something in between. If they would recommend, if they would learn that I don't like that scary stuff, and please just stop recommending it because it scares me too much. One of the other areas that I just love learning about from different people, I have a little bit of an obsession with productivity. And so I love hearing from modern workers. How are you doing the modern world of work? I talk to so many folks that are just overwhelmed, and there's so much information and there's so many different ways to do things, and sometimes continuing learning itself can be overwhelming. And for us multi-passionate learners, there's so many different things I could do and could learn, and there's new research here. How do you think about your daily work? And maybe we can also talk about how do you continue your own learning?
Oh gosh, that's great. So I think it goes for both, for your work calendar and also for learning. It comes down to making space for stuff, right? So if you have a big deadline or something that I got to build by end of week, then on my Google Calendar, I'm going to make like blocks of time for that. If I don't make it, it's really easy to get lost in like the email black hole of doom and just keep checking things and then getting sidetracked. And there's so many distractions. So I think making space and making like doable goals. Like, so we use Asana and Intellum as a team, and I have my task, but we also have like these project boards. So me, I try to funnel everything down to my own task board, and I have like customized columns for due today, due tomorrow, this week, this month, and later. And so I know what is most urgent, and I can chip away and work ahead. So yeah, making space, making doable goals for yourself. Always, the analogy I used to give my students actually when I taught college prep was, think about a steak. You're not going to do the whole thing in one bite. It's impossible. You cut off little chunks at a time to digest it thoroughly, and you got to treat your time and calendar for like that the same way. And if you think of your week as like a plate, you got to make blocks and time off for learning. So for me, I have on Fridays a block for professional development. Do I always use it? Not always. I usually often will work over it, but it's there. I'm trying to make space to make sure I get time in for learning. And that's a hard one. I know for some people, being part of a group, like a book club that has its own deadlines, helps you make space for learning. Because if it's just read a book on your own, I know for me, it might happen eventually. I'm a serial book starter, not ending a book. I'll have like 15 books started at one time and not finish them all. It drives my wife nuts. She likes to read one book at a time, cover to cover, and then me, I'm like, oh, this is cool, let's try that. And like, I'll start reading everything. And yeah, I think making time and space and being intentional is huge.
Okay, that gives me two follow-up questions. One is, when you make this is going to be really micro, but I think it's important for the people to know. When you make the block of time and you use the time blocking method for a project, and somebody says, hey, I see that there's a block on your calendar, but is it real? Do you move anything, or just is it known that that's a block? Do you let anybody in there?
Okay, that's a great question. One of my colleagues, probably 12 years ago, told me, Jordan, she said, protect your time. And that kind of stuck with me. So it's not being mean. I think having really healthy boundaries on your calendar is a good thing. But it also depends. If my manager, who like hardly ever bugs me on requests for calendar, says, "Hey Jordan, can we meet for 10 minutes tomorrow?" and it's like during my block, I'm like, "Do it, let's go for it." So I think it depends on. I'm not going to be hard-hearted, but stiff arm every human being that tries to get in. Because but I think we have a good culture where people don't overly bug each other for calendar invites. So it's not, for me, it's really a non-issue. And a lot of people do chunk their calendars off. So a practical tool I use is Calendly, which syncs to my Google Calendar. So if someone's, "Hey, I want a quick coffee chat," that's on LinkedIn, I can just share that link to them. They can find an open slot that hasn't been blocked off yet on my calendar. And so, yeah, so again, just making space for stuff and leaving some windows open for, unpredictable things that might happen or requests. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I similarly do a lot of project-based work, so I try to get there. And sometimes it changes because I'm an entrepreneur and I have clients at several different companies. It ebbs and flows based on urgency and all of those things.
I've seen some people like on my team, they will put as an acronym DNS on certain blocks that says "do not schedule." So we know, in general, I think also having team agreements, we all know if we see a block to ask first before scheduling in general, but some people will label stuff like "do not schedule" over this if it's like a really important block. So I think pre-communication with stakeholders, or if you're an entrepreneur, saying, "Hey, here's how I work with people," right? And kind of going over that beforehand just goes a long way and avoids drama down the road.
Well, it sounds like y'all have a really great culture, too, of established norms and communication around those things, because it also sounds like you're not in meetings all the time, which can be another thing that happens in cultures where back to back, 10 meetings a day. And then we saw that research that came out with the brain scans that shows our brain after too many Zoom meetings. So, Jordan, we know that this is a time where we continue to experience one dynamically changing situation after another over the last several years with the pandemic, with everything going on. And now many folks in jobs would have insecurity, or there's just it feels unsure out there, right? It feels a little angsty. And so I'd love to hear your perspective on challenges that you're facing and any ways you like to think about this current moment in time and how you like to conquer challenges yourself.
Okay, yeah. I think I'll rewind a little bit in time during pandemic when I was looking for work, and I realized really quickly that when you're going through a challenge, you need community around you. You need people that, on LinkedIn, we know we should like network and connect with people, but I'm also talking about in real life, community, and from your faith group, from your family, who are going to cheer for you and support you. And even when you're going through a challenge, if you have the bandwidth to invest or pour into people, it's great to do that. There's so many people who have mentored me and poured into my life over the years. So making time for that even when you're going through your own job search or your own challenge to find time to connect with people and help them is great, because there'll be a time when they're in a challenge again, or vice versa, and they got your back, right? They know to support you as well. And they'll see that the connection is more genuine versus, "Hey, let's have a coffee chat so I can sell you this new pyramid scheme," whatever it is. So I think just genuine connection, helping serve people. I think part of that's, I'm a Christian, so like, my faith model through Christ is, servanthood, and poured over into how I view connection with people. Am I always the best at it? No way. There's a lot of times where I make selfish decisions or do things that are short-sighted, but I think community and consistency. So I know some people are very close to me right now who are looking for jobs, and it's so overwhelming, right? You look at a LinkedIn posting, and there's like 400 people have applied already to it, and you're like, should I even bother to do this? So I think having little tiny doable goals for yourself each day, like, okay, I'm going to update my resume and apply to 2 jobs, but then just go enjoy your family. Take a breath, right? I know a lot of people, like, I have a lot of privilege right now. Like, I have a job, and I'm looking back with hindsight at this. So I know that people who are in the job market now, it's very different and probably harder. So consistency, community, and making space for rest is important. Because I remember when I was looking for a job, I was getting burnt out. It felt like a part-time job, just job searching. So I think making space to rest with your family as well is super important, because it can be exhausting, when you're going through a challenge like that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think, so many people are needing to hear some encouragement and some practical words of wisdom at this moment in time, since we've been hitting so much on learning that it can also be such a time to invest in yourself. And it seems like, when you have that fear and insecurity that I've got to go out and do all these things and make these connections and all of that, but another area to invest in is you and your learning, and it might be a moment to switch into a different direction. And I think that maybe that's a piece of all the kind of feeling of change and uncertainty can also be people that have their eyes open to see it as opportunity, to see it as, and not to diminish the way it feels, because I've been there too, in the real challenge it is every day when there's stuff going on, to take one step in front of the other and move forward. I think that's part of the power of when people choose to consistently invest over time, just like you would in the stock market, those that continue to invest instead of trying to time it, they find out that it's more beneficial to be the continual investor than I think I'm going to go now. Let's go, Jordan, to any book recommendations, podcasts, any other input, and then we'll make sure that folks know where to find you.
So again, I love how I mentioned invest in yourself. I remember from my background as a teacher, you're just always so busy thinking about your classroom. There's not a whole lot of time to invest in yourself typically. So it almost felt selfish at first. I'm going to do things for me, right? So I had to break that mindset. And there's also, I hate to put it this way, there's a lot of like hustlers and swindlers on LinkedIn who want to sell you their side products or projects, right, to teach you how to do everything. But there's a lot of great free stuff out there that you can start with. For example, if you want to get into instructional design or customer ed, there's so many great books out there to start with. So if you want to get the basics of learning design for a variety of audiences, a great one to start with is Design for How People Learn by Julie Dirksen.
Okay, so Jordan, I remembered my question from earlier, and it was when you were talking about the block of time on Friday for learning. I want to know how you select what is your learning priority. What's the thing you're trying to work on?
So you know how I tell you I start 15 books at once?
Yes.
So I have a tab on my computer that says PD on it. When I open it, it's like a group of tabs. There's like, I think 6 different things going on right now in that tab. I have a course on DEI. I'm doing a course on the OKLCD model, it's a learning design model for curating resources that's trying to learners. And it's bad. I'm always in learning debt. It's a good thing. It's a good problem to have. My queue of books and things I want to learn is just out the door. So I think for me, the way I decide what to work on first is like immediate need for my own work life. So right now I'm trying to design a product onboarding sequence for thousands of clients. And so I'm really learning that OKLCD model because it's about how to address multiple personas, right? So for me, I think moment of need is a big way I decide for what to learn next. Also, if there's money or a deadline attached to it, that's also a big motivator for me. So I know my DEI course from USF expired. I got to get it done before December. So it's on the front of my burner, And then I'm reading several books on the side right now about learning design as well. So
I love it. I'm always interested in that. Okay, I might have some activities for you that I'll follow up with and give to you because this is an area that I train around, is getting clear on your learning priority and building modern learning habits. And so I'll follow up with some stuff. So let's go to any of your book recommendations.
Yeah, so a great one to start with, this is a super popular one, is Design for How People Learn by Julie Dirksen. She actually has a new book coming out in this coming year called Design for the Elephant, I think. It's about like motivating people's behavior. She in this book, it's a great read because she has funny cartoons throughout that are super sarcastic. So if you like memes and sarcasm, she definitely models what she preaches by making it very segmented and doable to learn. So this is a great book.
Talk to the Elephant is the next
one. Yeah, Talk to the Elephant. That's it. Yeah, that's coming out soon. By the way, I'm not affiliated with any of these authors. I'm not being like paid to mention their books. Just a big fan, by the way. Just a little side note. Another book that I absolutely adore is Building Expertise by Ruth Colvin Clark. You can get this super affordable from Amazon, thrift books, and so forth. It covers everything about the design process for learning and how to avoid cognitive overload. It talks about how to handle things for immediate transfer and far. It's like awesome, especially for customer education. It's not a customer ed book, but like this is like a little Bible for that, for learning design.
She's got a great last name too, so I already like her.
Yeah, there we go. You guys, I don't know, maybe it's like a long lost cousin. I don't know, something like that. By the way, anything written by Dr. Colvin Clark here is like gold. She has a lot of books out there, so like definitely keep your eye out for her. Map It by Cathy Moore.
I've got that one back there.
You do? Yay! This is especially if you're moving in or are in corporate learning or L&D or customer ed, it helps you really focus on the right conversations and design for learning that will solve an actual performance problem. And it also considers the environment and the culture and other things in the business surrounding the learning need. She hates the word training. She avoids that word at all costs until much later on. And I love how she talks about how we're the heroes to help them not fall victim to another bad learning experience. I love her mindset. And because we talked about digital instruction, I highly recommend eLearning and the Science of Instruction. It covers all of Mayer's 12 multimedia principles. It's also co-authored by Ruth Colvin Clark. So, cha-ching. She does a great job of distilling research into very practical, here's your checklist. I mean, like, just gold mines.
I have a follow-up question on those.
Yeah.
Do you think that any of those, if somebody's not necessarily in learning and development, but they're maybe like these people that are wanting to build their own courses or things like that, are there any of those that you would guide towards or something different for people that maybe don't have the full background but are trying, they might be experts in their own content and they're trying to like start to build some of their own learning resources?
Oh, so you mean, let's say I'm an expert in how to handle agriculture, but I'm not an expert in learning, and I want to build my own courses?
Yes.
Yeah, so I would recommend for them, as a first read, is this one.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's a good first read. Yeah, and then it depends on what you're making, but if you're going to do a lot of like instructional videos or online course content, this one is a good read too. And there's also summaries online of a lot of the principles in there, so yeah.
Yeah. That's just my hope for people making better online courses in general when they get started down that track.
Yeah.
Okay, and any podcast recommendations or any other, you talked about some of the courses.
Yeah, so for podcasts, there's a great online instructor named Connie Malamed. She's someone who's worked in corporate learning for a long time, and she has a website and a podcast called The eLearning Coach. Great stuff. And she's like one of those, she's not your typical influencer where she's really loud on social media or LinkedIn, but she's a true practitioner of learning design. So when she talks, I perk up and listen to it a lot. Another great podcast is a couple that Dr. Heidi Kirby touches. It's called the Block Podcast, BLOCC. That's her own personal learning podcast. And then she's also now involved with a website and a resource collection, and I think they have a podcast too called Useful Stuff. And their whole goal is just provide useful things for learning designers and people in our field.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, Jordan, tell us, where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm super active on LinkedIn. So if you just look up Jordan Hopkins and Intellum on LinkedIn, you'll find my profile on there. I love connecting to people. I love chatting about jobs and learning from different industries. I don't just follow people in like instructional design or customer ed. In fact, I get a lot of value from hearing from people from marketing and from writing because it informs what I do on a daily basis. So please say hi, reach out and connect. I'm definitely not shy at all on LinkedIn. So please say hey.
Wonderful. Jordan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing all of your insights, and I look forward to staying connected over the course of our time. Thanks so much for listening to the Building Thinkers podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a podcast rating and review. That helps more listeners find us in the world of podcasting algorithms. You can find out more about my learning and development strategy services at buildingthinkers.com. And remember, there's no limit to what you can learn.